Mrs. Desmond Cottrell was spending the weekend with a friend who lived at Barnet, an ancient village situated in the northern outskirts of London, and on the second day of her visit it was proposed that they should call upon a certain Lady Dalglish, who was very old and who liked to see a new face. "How old is she?" asked Mrs. Cottrell, speaking in a muffled voice from within the collar of her fur coat, as they walked the short distance to Waterloo Lodge, where the seeker after new faces awaited them. It was already late April, but the wind in this village set high above the capital was cold. "Really old? Of course, nowadays no one is old until they're over 70, but she must be well over 80. Her husband was Sir Bertram Dalglish, you know." "I don't know. Ought I to?" asked Mrs. Cottrell.
"Well," her friend confessed, "I hadn't heard of him myself until I met Lady D. He was a mountaineer and an Alpine scientist, very famous in his day, and the author of some books on the geology of the Alps. At least, I think it's geology."
"How lovely," Mrs. Cottrell muttered dreamily. But she did not mean by this Sir Bertram's geological works, for she was not at all bright, as she frequently confessed, and had only a vague idea of what geology is about. She meant the Alps, which she had not seen since her honeymoon in Grindelwald 20 years ago. At this moment, they passed a short road, which opened out on a prospect of London lying upon the horizon. It appeared endless, and even beautiful when seen at a distance of 6 miles away in clear spring light. But in fact it was, as Mrs. Cottrell knew well, too large and very dirty and quite hideous. She sighed. Yes, it must be 20 years, nearer 21, since she had last seen the Alps.
"He died fairly young," her friend continued, "before the 1914 war. He was only in the early 60s, I believe. He left her a lot of money, and she already had a lot of her own, so she's rich, even for nowadays."
"Any children?" inquired Mrs. Cottrell. It was always the first question she asked about married people. She herself was 43 years old and childless.